Hi there. I think that it's happening. This is my first time ever going live, so if you are here, I don't know who's out there. I don't really know how this is working, but it says in the corner that we are live, so I'm just gonna go ahead and jump in. And if there is somebody out there who is watching, if you know how to make those like hearts float up, I've seen that before. It's very cute. So I am here tonight to talk about breathing because I think there's a little kind of a black hole of information around breathing. And it is because sometime very early in our vocal education, when we're all in like middle school choir, we are told, breathe with your belly, breathe with your diaphragm. And we all sort of nod our heads and say, yes, I will definitely do this. But we're never really told why or how the system works. And so we're left sort of lying awake in the middle of the night thinking like, I'm not really sure I understand how that works because breathing happens in the lungs. I learned that in biology class. And in my belly, that's actually where my intestines are. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But we don't want to be that person who's raising their hand in choir and saying, I don't get this very fundamental idea about breathing. So I'm here tonight to just shine a little light into this dark corner. And the reason for that is, I think, number one, I just want to say I'm not here to debunk diaphragmatic breathing. I do think it is the right way to breathe for singing, but I think that if the ultimate goal of my work here is to help you be a more confident singer, then helping you to understand how your breath works is going to enable you to, number one, make a more informed decision about whether this is something you actually want to do. And number two, to help you be more observant about what your own body is doing so that you can really become more proactive in the way you sing. So let me start out by saying there are two basic ways of breathing for singing. The first one is high clavicular breath. And when I talk about these two ways of breathing, I will talk about both the location of the breath and also this sort of direction of energy in the breath, the way that the breath cycle works. So we're drawing a distinction between high clavicular breath and low diaphragmatic breath. Now, in the first high clavicular breath, this is like how a cartoon person breathes. So you can imagine they are engaging on the inhalation and the breath is moving upward on inhalation, and then they're going to deflate or release on exhalation and the breath will move down. So I'll demonstrate. Here's my cartoon person or high clavicular breath. So you see that my energy, the actually efforting part of this is on inhalation, and then I'm filled up to bursting, and then I have to just sort of deflate down to my comfort point. So that's a high clavicular breath, and then the alternative to that would be a diaphragmatic breath. And I'll show this to you standing up so you can see where the thing is happening. So here's my belly button, and for a diaphragmatic breath, I'm going to feel a drop and a softening down here. And now, so I'm actually engaging more muscular work and energy on the exhalation, which moves up, and my inhalation is just released or dropped downward. So we've got opposite directions and we've got opposite patterns of effort with the way the breath is used. Now, those are the two different types of breath. And I'm going to explain why I do agree with your 7th grade music teacher, you should choose diaphragmatic breath for your singing. But let me say before I do that, just to be totally clear, both types of breathing, every kind of breathing you can possibly do, only takes place in the lungs. There is no type of breath where you're actually sending air down into the viscera, into the guts. Air cannot leave your lungs. So just to be totally clear, to kind of set our bottom line of clear information, the air is going in the lungs. And when we're talking about these other parts of the body, we're talking about altering the shape or the movement of the body in the sort of supporting areas to make the breath move out of the lungs where the air is more efficiently in a more optimal way. So breath is always in the lungs. That's one of the things. And then here's the other thing, and this is why I tend to cringe at the term diaphragmatic breath. Any way you breathe, unless there's something very, very seriously wrong, is going to engage the diaphragm because it's the principal muscle that's involved in breathing. So even that really tense, high clavicular breath, you're still using your diaphragm. So I'll continue to call it diaphragmatic breath just because that's kind of the term that is out there, but a more accurate term would be like breath that supports the natural movement of the diaphragm, which is happening anyway, but it needs rebranding because that's a terrible thing to call it. So those are our two options here. And before I start kind of proselytizing for team diaphragm or diaphragmatic breath, I want to show you, number one, how the diaphragm actually works, like what its function is. And then number two, think about what the demands of singing are for the breath. And that way we can figure out which one of those two breathing modalities is going to actually support the functions that we need for singing. So here's how the diaphragm works. Your diaphragm is like a sheet of muscle, and it is shaped like a dome. So if you imagine that your rib cage here is almost like an inverted bowl, and imagine if that bowl was covered with saran wrap. That saran wrap you could think of as the diaphragm, and in its normal relaxed position, it's actually kind of lifted up into the bowl of the rib cage. So the released position of the diaphragm is up like this, and it is attached all the way around the rib cage, like all the way back to the spine. So here it is, it's a three-dimensional muscle, and when it contracts, that is the part of the movement that is linked to inhalation. So when the diaphragm muscle contracts, it lowers down into a flattened shape. That's what happens as those muscle fibers are contracting. It's flattening down, and that is actually opening the lungs, and because they don't want to be in lower pressure than the air around you, you will just take in air. It's a very natural way of inhaling because it's just pulling air into the lungs. You don't have to suck air in with muscle power. So the diaphragm contracts, it lowers, air comes into the lungs, and that's inhalation. Then the diaphragm is going to, on exhalation, release back into its domed shape. So I'm just going to give you a little demonstration of your diaphragm moving. Here's my little dome of muscle. I'm going to inhale, and as I inhale, it's the movement of the diaphragm that's actually pulling downward and kind of pulling air into my lungs. And now, on exhalation, the diaphragm will rise back up into its dome shape. Once more, inhalation, exhalation. Now, something about the diaphragm is that it is a muscle, but unlike your bicep or tricep, it's not a muscle that you can't sort of use it harder. I can't say I'm going to support my singing by really squeezing my diaphragm, and that's going to really forcefully expel my air. It's also not totally true to say that you don't have any conscious control over it, because you can, in fact, regulate the speed of your breathing. So that is, in fact, a sense in which it's a skeletal muscle that you can control, but the nervous relationship to it is a little different than that of some of our other muscles in the body that we can just say, go harder and release. So rather than thinking about controlling the flexion of that muscle specifically, it's more helpful to think about how we can use the other muscles surrounding, over which we have more conscious control, to really support that natural work of the diaphragm. And this is where we come into the kind of preference among singers and voice teachers for diaphragmatic breathing over clavicular breathing. Because if you imagine here that when we go to sing, if this diaphragm is pulling down and opening the lungs, then an upward pull On this inhalation, you can see that we're sort of creating this, this oppositional relationship in the direction. And because the lower part of the abdomen is so sucked in on that type of inhalation, that high clavicular breath, then we're not leaving any room for the diaphragm to just drop down. So it will still move into its contracted flat position, but it's having a much harder time to doing so. So let's now look at knowing what the diaphragm is going to do. Let's also think about what exactly do we want our breath to accomplish during our singing. Well, we want our inhalations to be nice and quick because we don't want to have to spend, our whole lives inhaling, especially if we only have a 8th rest, 16th rest, maybe a catch breath between phrases. We want to be able to get in a lot of air quickly, and we want our exhalation to be lengthened and controlled because that's when the singing happens, right? So again, this might seem like a real no-brainer, but if you've never actually stopped to think about it and acknowledge exhalation, breath moving out is when the singing happens. And by controlling our exhalation, or by supporting our exhalation and allowing that exhalation to be really lengthened and supported, that's where we're going to get the control over our singing that we're hoping to get. So this is all coming around to the idea that that diaphragmatic breath, where we are softening the belly wall on inhalation and allowing the guts or the viscera to drop lower, that is going to obviously make a very easy position for the diaphragm to lower into, right? I'm softening the belly. When I do, my guts drop down because of gravity, and it's very easy for the diaphragm to lower into that flattened position, to contract downward quickly and without any resistance. That's how I'm going to get the released inhalation that's going to give me a quick, full inhalation. So I'm going to try that here. I'm going to release here as I open my throat and inhale. Nice and easy. And it just feels like dropping, like my guts are just dropping down. Now that I'm going to go for my lengthened, controlled exhalation, and this is where I would substitute the singing, I am going to engage these low muscles of the belly. So I'm thinking like between the belly button and the pubic bone, I'm going to engage those muscles almost like it's a basket and I'm trying to tighten the mesh or the knit. I'm going to engage those muscles, which is going to lift those guts back upward and really help to support that upward dome-shaped movement of the diaphragm. So I've dropped my belly down on inhalation, and now I'm going to engage here to lift and send the breath upward. I'm going to release here and drop down. And now I'm going to engage again and send that dome back upward. So there are two kind of sensations that I would love for you to become more aware of as you're working on this type of low diaphragmatic breath. The first thing is the sensation of direction. You should feel that on inhalation, the breath is moving downward. Now, again, it's not moving any lower than up in your lungs, but it will feel like a really, a vertical, like a downward drop as you're getting those kind of, that belly wall softened and the guts are dropping. Then on exhalation, you want the sensation of air moving upward. And that is in fact totally true because, the lungs are here, your mouth is here, the sound is flowing up. So I would really encourage you to tap into that sense of direction, down on inhalation, up on exhalation, and also observe what's happening in terms of your muscular engagement. On inhalation, you want release in these muscles. On exhalation or singing, you want engagement in these muscles. Now just take a second to acknowledge, because we're all about clarity here, and I don't want to leave this unmentioned because it is a little confusing. What we're doing with the muscles of the low belly is in fact opposite to the contraction and release of the diaphragmatic muscles, right? So this downward Drop in the low belly is release in the abdominals, and it's contracting in the diaphragm. But again, because we don't have that strong sensory input from the diaphragm itself, you don't feel like a crunching sensation as the diaphragm drops. You're really going to be much more aware of the drop in the belly, dropping down on inhalation, and then engaging to send it up on exhalation. All right, so that is what I have to tell you about diaphragmatic breath tonight. It's just a quick little snippet, but I hope that it can be useful to you and maybe let you feel a little bit more confident next time somebody asks you about breath and you say, I believe in diaphragmatic breath, I believe in using the diaphragm, and you can actually know why. You're keeping the breath in the lungs, you're monitoring the direction and the engagement of the muscles as you breathe. Now, if you'd like more of this sort of voice education, I have a whole bunch of videos over for you at the weekly warm-up, and I'm also doing a workshop next week. So on May 25th at 7:30, there will be a workshop called Use It, Don't Lose It. We're going to cover breath really in depth with multiple exercises so you can learn not only how it works, but also how to do it in your very own personal body. We're also going to tackle things like posture, resonance. We're going to do the whole thing, soup to nuts, so that you can really apply it to your singing practice at home and feel like you are maintaining and even growing your vocal abilities while you're at home, separated from your choir. So if you'd like to visit the website, come over to theweeklywarmup.com. And if you would like to come to the workshop, there is a registration page over at tinyurl.com/useitworkshop. That's kind of a mouthful, so you can also just come over to the website and check out the workshops page, and it'll take you right there. I'm so grateful to those of you who are here tonight. I can see you. I see the little hearts flying up, so thank you so much for being here on my very first one, and I hope that it was useful to you, and I look forward to the next one. Thanks a lot. Good night, everybody.